welcome to this BIGtoken webinar on the theme of the 4 pillars of ethically sourced data. I want to welcome everyone. My name's Gilbert Hill, and I wanted to, the structure for our session is we're going to do a dive into what are the 4 pillars, how can we apply them, and how do they relate to the huge shifts which are happening both in privacy, in the ad tech landscape, and beyond. I'm based in the UK, but we've got representation from Jersey, not a small island off the coast of UK, but New Jersey and New York and Arkansas. So I wanted to introduce the guests, the panelists. First up, we've got Ariel Garcia. Ariel Garcia is UM's Chief Privacy Officer, which is a newly created role assumed earlier this summer, and focused on brand safety, privacy, obviously, and media responsibility. And in this role, Ariel is overseeing UM's entire privacy practice, setting the strategic vision and direction, and developing and implementing the policies and procedures, and making sure that they happen. So quite a lot going on that front. Ariel also provides guidance to clients and internal teams on privacy-related matters and for scaling the engine of UM's offerings around privacy, trust, and brand safety. And when not at UM, she also serves as head of business operations and compliance globally for the ExxonMobil and Accenture accounts. She is also tasked with future-proofing their brand protection strategy. So the whole gamut. So welcome, Ariel. Next up, we've got Tiffany Johnson. Tiffany Johnson is VP of Innovation and Data. I think another newly created role. So real trailblazers all around here. At Meredith Corporation, publishers, she's got 15 years plus of strategic data and technology experience across a range of advertising and consulting roles. She's an ethical data advocate, and I can say from experience, she's also an expert in this space. And we've had a number of interesting conversations already where we've covered a lot of ground in this area, from privacy through ad tech, and I'm looking forward to catching up. And she's a strong believer in helping companies discover their own path towards ethical data ownership, and also transparency in its use. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn in saying that she believes that changing the conversation on how we collect data is possible and necessary, and that data can help businesses stay innovative. And we were just joking before we started, I actually rushed over here today from a conference on AI, where there was huge investment by companies in AI. And what was interesting was that they're all realizing that without this ethical layer, without this ethical wrapper, not only are they missing out the legitimacy to use this exciting technology, but also there's a danger of junk data coming in and getting amplified by those very algos, those algorithms that they're getting excited about and are commissioning. So based on that, I wanted to introduce finally George Steller. George is co-founder and president of BIGtoken, our hosts, who are the leading ethically sourced identity, data, and consumer insights creation platform. George has got more than 20 years of experience driving digital shopper strategies, starting at Comedy Central, then moving on to 24/7 Real Media, where he was 11 years as a sales director. And he's been key from day one in crafting BIGtoken's early commercial product strategy, bringing this to market, and enhancing the shopper marketing experience in a whole new way. And George mentioned when we were speaking earlier that BIGtoken now has 9 of the 10 leading US brands in its portfolio. So really shaking things up. So really great to have you all on the call. I'm looking forward to some lively debate around the 4 pillars of ethically sourced data. I'm going to quickly set the scene with a couple of slides. I've got disabled, host disabled screen sharing, but hopefully I can get a screen share. If not, I can I can just give a summary. That's no problem. So in terms of introducing myself, as I mentioned, my name's Gilbert. I'm a privacy technologist and a digital marketer, and I ran a London tech agency for 10 years, building websites, mobile apps, and interactive campaigns, where I became fascinated by what we're talking about here, which is the relationship between marketing and privacy. And it looks like I'm a host, so I think I can even share the screen, because there's I can promise you there's a funny visual gag coming on, or maybe not. Hopefully you're all seeing my screen now. Brilliant. Okay, we're in business. So I actually pivoted that agency into one of the first PrivTech firms providing cookie consent solutions. So you can partly blame me for those dreaded cookie banners. And I now provide consultancy to organizations and blockchain projects around privacy and data ethics. And I'm also a tutor for these subjects in the Institute of Data Marketing. And why am I saying this? Because it gives me exposure to people in real life talking about privacy. And the question I hear most from students, friends and family, and other normal people about their data, it's is my phone listening to me? And if so, who is listening? Well, we know here that, that Alexa is. And in 2021, with smart devices and contact tracing apps, certainly here in the UK, we're asked to accept surveillance technology in our homes, and an apparent choice sometimes between our health and our rights as to privacy as human beings. And a great deal of trust is being placed with our government and private service providers, and the risks of getting it wrong have never been higher, frankly. So how did we get to this point? Well, it is about human rights. And if we take the first phase of the web as defined by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, that was about connecting machines. The second era was about productizing humans via our data and our attention. We've all heard that, truism that, if you're getting something for free on the internet, you are the product. And this has been happening day in, day out. And the problem is that it's largely been without our agreement or even our awareness. Now, GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, forerunner to CCPA, CPRA, and other different legislations across the world, was about resetting this balance, and it's fundamentally a piece of human rights legislation, which is based on 6 principles around fairness, transparency, and equity, under the new overarching principle of accountability, which is basically that what you say you do, you demonstrate across all the areas of your business and your relationship with consumers. And it's a watershed moment. It's a framework for the ethical capture, storage, and use of personal data. And I think is ushering in a third, the Web3, the more humanist age. And as these figures show, there's growing concern among consumers around their privacy and the deal that takes place when their data is captured, shared, and used. In particular, we see that 78% of people believe that businesses get the best deal from data exchange. And a majority of people fear they've lost control of their personal data and want to be juiced into that deal. So how do we reset this relationship? Well, business as usual has been forever changed by GDPR and other regulations. And the way that most companies and their advisors have dealt with this is understandably to focus on a set of legal obligations. But it's much harder to answer the question which now starts to nag at us, which is, just because something is technically possible with data and currently legal, is it the right thing to do? Now, this is where our conversation starts and where ethics starts to come in. It's something that's getting increasing traction both academically and at boardroom level as a means to move towards a roadmap for doing the right thing. So before we get started, we'll just explore the options. Basically, you're going to need an ethical framework, which is a set of codes. this is an example, and I'm aware of around 70 different ethical frameworks that brands are now starting to apply, which many of which are pretty high level, but they're getting the C-suite, getting the senior management invested, and also being tied to key performance indicators. But we don't want to do this in isolation, but relate better practice around data to better business results. And I'm sure we'll be diving into that in a moment. So finally, we can boil this down further to be more practical into 4 key pillars, which we'll be examining today in more detail. So when rebuilding this trust, which we can see from that consumer insights has been shaken, the key thing here is stressing and re-stressing the value exchange, the data deal, and also the why as well as the how in the use of personal data for marketing, AI, as I mentioned, or any other purposes. Because, as consumers and people, we view trust holistically using these pillars. And once lost, it's difficult to rebuild. And that's why we keep on thinking about these principles hopefully in all the different areas of our marketing activity. So having briefly introed that sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Having briefly introed that, I wanted to, sorry about this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a moment. While I'm doing that, I just wanted to, ask a question that, obviously we're using these 4 pillars as the foundation for ethically sourced data, and ethically sourced data has, it reminds me of some of the conversations going on with ESG and obviously ethically sourced produce. First question really is, do you agree with these pillars? And have we boiled it down enough, or do we need to zoom out again? Now, obviously, I think, Ariel, it'd be great for you to lead on this. What kind of questions should we be asking ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, I think that this is exactly right. But I do kind of want to pan out a bit just for another moment, because I think you did such a great job setting up how we got here and that foundational unspoken bargain that really underpins the internet and has underpinned a free and open web. So what I would add is that from a macro level, the question we need to be asking ourselves is whether the ways in which we're collecting and using data is fair from the consumer's standpoint. And so if we look at the way that the bargain is now perceived, if you will, by the consumer, that's really where trust has been broken. Now, why is that? Well, we have lack of transparency. They didn't know how data was being used or collected. It wasn't clear to them. They have an intrusive, annoying ad experience. They feel stalked by ads that seem to know more about them than they voluntarily shared. They have lack of choice. So once they start to be attuned to this, they have limited options for controlling their preferences, and further, who their information gets shared with. And then you have, of course, high profile incidents of data misuse. And related shoulder shrugging and buck passing. So namely, lack of accountability. So for example, last week, the Facebook files highlight an example of how this dynamic can result in harm to people, where Facebook made an update to its algorithm that was supposed to make Facebook a better place. And when they found out that it was actually having the opposite effect, there was reluctance to reverse it. And why is that? Because that would lower potentially interaction with their platform, which was not a good commercial outcome. And so that's the challenge when you have this unchecked ability to pursue commercial outcomes at the expense of people. And that's what's really at the core of this. To your point, the value exchange just was not cutting it anymore. So over time, consumers develop this perception that this is not fair to them. They stand to lose more than they stand to gain. And they're being commoditized versus treated as people. So with that said, I think, transparency, of course, we agree on that as a pillar. The value exchange, I think, is central, right? So when we think about personalization and the future of personalization, we need to think about this from the vantage point of what is purposeful personalization, not personalization for the sake of it or only in our own commercial interests, right? But how does this actually improve people's experience? How does it deliver value to people? Accountability and really, I think responsibility is key, because I think that responsibility piece is where we start weighing commercial interests against the impact on people. And I think, in the data context, accountability, I feel, is more closely aligned with, regulatory requirements, whereas from a responsibility standpoint, it's not just about the data that you're sourcing. It's about the full supply chain, and that includes upstream and downstream. Where was that data sourced from? If you source the data from an entity that didn't collect it themselves, where did they get it from? And what does the accountability, how does that accountability flow through the supply chain on that side? But also when you activate, how is that data being used downstream? And so it goes beyond this tick the box compliance. So the one that I've reserved comment on is consent. The one thing that I would say there is that, in my view, I think choice is a better way to position it, and I don't mean that to be just a matter of of word play. What I mean is, I think that we can go beyond this, frankly, poor user experience that we've seen via explicit opt-in mechanisms, and instead think about how we can enable a default that lends itself to better user experience. So that's the only one I'd reposition. I also think that via choice, we can give people more granular controls, which is ultimately to their benefit and to the benefit of brands, who are then able to reach their interested audiences more efficiently.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's fair enough around consent. That consent has been it's been stretched to breaking point in many in prior to GDPR and in that phase of the web. And I think what people are saying is that they don't want to give up ad funded content. They do value the content that they get, but they do want to have more control and more choice. Just like if we can stick on the analogy of ethically sourced produce, you have lots of choices in the store, whether you're about where and you've got also clear labeling about where the journey that produce has made before it reached the store, and that's harder to do. Obviously, to establish that provenance with data, many of it is has been third party and handed around, and there's been less care taken with the kind of whole data life cycle. Tiffany, I wanted to bring you in. Obviously, you've got experience across the whole data life cycle, and can obviously give the viewpoint of the publishers who also haven't necessarily always been best served by some of the status quo. Do these pillars help you?
So in the publishing world, yes, but also have extensive experience in the advertising world, and as far as the pillars go, yes. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Yes, they're absolutely helpful, and more so like when I think about data ethics. So this data ethics beyond pure compliance, right? When I think about it, whether it's in the publishing world, whether it's in the ad agency world, any world in which like we handle data on a day-to-day basis, it's good business, right? So good ethics is good business. And what I actually see is, to Ariel's point, it's not just consent, it's choice. And what we're saying is that if you give consumers transparency and you give them choice, there are multiple ways of which then you're acquiring more accurate data, and then also better ways to use that data. So instead of like kind of hitting your head against the wall continually of trying to reach people that don't want to talk to you. And I often put this in the analogy of like dating somebody or trying to date somebody that doesn't want to date you. Like you've broken up with that person doesn't want to hear from you. And yet like we as like companies that use data and just think like, no, they want to hear from us. We're going to keep showing them that commercial 10 more times. It's like you're just sitting out front of that person's apartment and hoping and praying that they're going to pay attention to you. And that's what companies are doing, right? Whenever they're not giving choice and transparency, is they're just like, they're just reaching out to people again and again with expensive advertising, expensive tactics, and like for people that don't want to really hear from them. And so I think choice means that, you now have this bucket of people that are like, I really want to hear from you. I want to hear about the latest sneaker that you developed. I want to hear about the latest whiskey. I want to hear if you have a new flavor of hard seltzer that I'm going to try all of them. I'm going to try every flavor. So I want to hear about the latest, greatest. And so then you get this really loyal group of people. And so I think that's what choice and transparency does. And that's what data ethics does for us as well. Then they know how you're using your data. It's a back and forth relationship. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to create these big awareness campaigns so that you can keep pulling in those little customers. It just means that you're using your data in the way that it was meant to be used and reaching out to people that actually want to hear from you. Good business.
I think you're dead right, and I really like that idea of getting a data restraining order, or kind of like data mace for the pop-up ad. And in fact, I was at this conference today, and there was a chap who was talking from IBM. He said that this is the classic example, that he'd bought his wife some lingerie 15 years ago, and he was still getting tracked around, and he just couldn't. He'd done all sorts of subject access requests to try and expunge his data, but it wouldn't leave him. And I think that just shows, I mean, there was this push to just get more and more data. And as a technologist, we were trained to build applications, just got all the data and then work out how to, and then only think about what good data lifecycle further down the line. And I think what's evident is, whether it's brands or agencies or publishers, is that there's a lot more thought about data and about doing more with less. And we have got some examples of that. Some of them have been small pools, like behind paywalls. I mean, I'm a subscriber to the Financial Times, and they do use data really judiciously. I get a paper copy delivered. I wanted to get that paused. They use that data to then, when I logged on to their web portal, to give me offers which obviously showed that they were sharing data between customer service representatives and marketing agents and their third-party partners. And they also started to feed that through into surveys that I'm happy to do, because I know I have that relationship of trust with the Financial Times, and because they offer me, like £200 worth of champagne if I get pulled out of the hat. And I never win, but I still follow that. So I think I agree with you. Ethical data is good business. And on that front, it does seem that we are moving on from. I mean, GDPR was introduced with a stick in terms of big fines, and I think that was the initial driver. But I think we're moving to a phase where ethical data is seen to be actually helping brands to create relevant customer experience. So I mean, George, it would be great to hear from you on this trust challenge, and how we can get from compliance and fine avoidance to those kind of insights we've been describing.
Sure, thanks. And by the way, I know exactly what it feels like to be that guy outside the apartment saying, "Why don't you talk to me? Why don't you want to talk to me?"
But George, you're not that person anymore.
Not anymore, but I was. Yeah, I mean, we've, at BIGtoken, we've our research shows that when a consumer is philosophically aligned with a brand, they'll share a lot more. And I think, just taking a step back for a second, and to Ariel's point, it has been a false bargain for so long with consumers. We've created a bunch of data as an industry off that false bargain, and consumers are now, I think the jig is up. They are fully aware of the dynamic and what's going on now. And so we have to be cognizant of that. Gilbert, it's, to your point, it's not a matter of what must we do, but what should we do? And if you treat the consumer with respect and you're collecting data and you're including them in the, the value exchange, right? I think the value exchange is really important. We can give them transparency and control, which I think is really, really important. But I think we know that when you ask a consumer, and our research shows that when you ask a consumer if they want control of their data, the overwhelming majority says yes. If you ask them if they want transparency around their data, overwhelming majority will say yes. But then ask them to take an extra 12 seconds to adjust their privacy settings, and they're probably going to blow right through it. I think the key is that you have to give them that control and transparency, and also show them that they're in the value exchange, so that when they're sharing information with you as a brand, you're giving them value back. When you do that, they will share everything with you. You'd be shocked at what our consumers opt in to share for a little bit of value, when you show them what it's worth, and when you show them that they're in the value exchange and you're treating them with respect, and you're treating them ethically. So it just creates, at the end of the day, the bottom line, it creates much better data for brands.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, I previously ran a startup, a blockchain startup, which helped people exercise some of their data rights because there wasn't enough control in a cookie banner or in a privacy notice. And again, we found that when we gave people started to get their data back from organizations, the first thing they wanted to do was correct what they got back. They found that the organizations had the wrong data about them, out of date. And it's like you were talking about, George, it was really interesting to see how they suddenly became proprietorial about their data. Because they had control, they felt they did get more involved. You're dead right. Most people don't have the time or inclination to spend lots of time every day playing around with their phones and their preference controls. But if you can build a relationship of trust with them, then you can start to be their that custodian. And I think that's really interesting. At this event today, there was a brand, there's IKEA, who are like huge here for flat pack furniture, and they were talking about, they had their chief technology officer, forgive me, Ariel, not their chief privacy officer, basically talking about their data privacy promise and saying that everything that they did was through the lens of data ethics. Does that mean that they stopped doing profiling, or that they stopped using data judiciously within their mobile apps or their web estate? No, but it's saying that they're viewing everything through that lens, and it's like we were saying, it's giving people control, either individually, or we're starting to see now with things like data unions, collectively, to flag up what they're happy with and not happy with. And like you're saying, people, you will be pleasantly surprised by how people respond, that they do give you more. Great. And I guess one of the so we talked about the opportunities to around ethically sourced data. Obviously, getting anything over the line in a complex organization has challenges, and all the panel members are experienced in meeting those challenges and getting those done. And bringing along stakeholders. So Tiffany, I wanted to know, is there, for my benefit, so I can nick your tools, is there a set of strategies or a go-to set of tools that you use to make ethical data practices and good ethical data business part of business as usual?
So really what it is right now is a series of strategies, right? We're starting to see tools come up from this, but it's a series of strategies by which, and I'm gonna admit that it sounds a little boring, right? But it's a process. It is the process by which you review everything starting from your RFPs, all the way through your data collection, how you use this data, why you're using this data. And you start to ask yourself, not what can I do? Because you can do anything, right? Like the technology exists, but what should I be doing? am I being conscious and considerate of my consumers? Am I using this data in a way that is conscious of my consumers and considerate of it? But then also, am I using this in a way that benefits the company, benefits the consumer? And so like, it's a series of processes. So for example, is, as simple as it sounds, again, it's a process. But when you're going through an RFP or you're going through a pitch, either way, it's being able to incorporate into that, talking about data ethics, how we use data ethics, asking the questions, even down to the, so what kind of pixels are you guys using? What kind of data are you collecting? What kind of data mapping do you have? And being able to map back where our data goes. This, again, I've been in advertising and I just recently gone to the publishing side, right? And so it's a little different on the publishing side because we have so much data and we have such a depth of data. And it's all, and Meredith is one, is very privacy conscious. And so meeting after meeting, it's how do we talk about consistently, how do we make this better? And so we started to integrate ethical processes, even down to the RFP of saying, what pixels are you guys collecting? What kind of data are we transferring? So that's a simple step that we can take. But then it goes to our audience targeting, it goes to the rest of our partnerships. We think about data clean rooms. If we're going to be sharing any kind of data, we make sure that data is also not able to be re-identified either. So, so we have anonymization, we use clean rooms, and then we're also every step we take, we think about how do we narrowly define any sharing of data and how do we use it. And that way, we're also properly permissioned. We do ask consumers about the data sharing practices. So I think that these are the kinds of things that that can be implemented. And again, it's a step by step assessment and audit of what you're doing right now. So you do the audit first. You got to understand what practices you have in place. What are you doing? And then step by step, systematically saying, here's how we update data ethics for all of our day-to-day processes. Because it's these little tweaks, these little steps that then equal this greater, bigger picture of implementing data ethics from beginning to end. And that's also when you start to do things where it does impact better business, is that you start to get that more accurate data. You start to really know who to focus on. Your data becomes not only more accurate, you know who to focus on. These are people that want to hear from you. And then you just get a lot more depth. Just as George had said, like when people trust you, they're going to want to have a better relationship with you because you are making their lives easier in some ways, right? Like you are providing more convenience, you're providing things they want to read, things they want to consume. All recipes is a good example of this as well. Providing an ability to look at a recipe and we know exactly how close you are to like a Walmart, and you're able to say, oh, can you just add that to my cart, and so that way I can go purchase that. Can you just add that to my grocery list? It's the sharing of data like this, but knowing that we're not using this in a we're not using this in an unethical manner, and so but it's making things more convenient for people as well. So I think that when we look at how we actually update data ethics and we really implement these strategies and also just looking at some of the tools that are starting to come around and support these things, it's really even small steps like equal greater things on the whole.
Yeah, I think that's right. There are no shortcuts, and it is a question of reviewing the whole process on an ongoing basis, like you said, and asking the same tough questions of suppliers and partners. And it gets me thinking: do you think that ethics is going to mean the kind of the ethics or shared 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 standards of best practice are going to mean an end to vanity metrics? Because there's all sorts of different gauges that have been used in the past, and they can change. Do you think that we can start to apply that to get better data and analysis of what we're doing as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I will say that there's going to be degrees of it, right? Just like, you have a new iPhone that comes out, or you have, any new, or new Samsung that comes out, you've got the people who are early adopters. They're there standing in line. They're going to pick that up immediately. And then you've got the people that have the 3-year-old phones and they're like, oh, maybe next year. But your more innovative companies, the companies that are going to lead this industry, are going to lead with an ethical stance. And they're going to lead with an ethical stance as well as because they have more information, because they're more trusted, they are going to start to look at more impactful metrics. Like everybody loves a good, a good click, a good page land, but there are more things that we can look at too. And cookieless attribution, so the understanding where people came from, what steps they've taken. This is also going to be something big that we'll see in the industry, I think, as well as we move forward. It's going to be your more innovative companies, these ones that are willing to let go of some of those age-old metrics, those age-old ways to measure that are going to be leading this.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, a question for you, Ariel, is that obviously GDPR was a kind of a seismic shift because it gave a lot more profile to the concerns of parts of a business that had always had them, but hadn't necessarily been a degree of separation from a C-suite. GDPR changed all that. What kind of role do you see the privacy officer and the privacy function and the compliance play in this ethics? Because we talked about, the success looks like joining up all the different pillars. So there's, good business sense, there's doing the right thing, there's good, good optics as well. So, part of what we do is driven by not appearing, from a business point of view on the side of a milk carton, but there's also, what kind of role and do you think there should be a leading role for the privacy function to play in this?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And just to give you a little bit of background, the way that my role is set up, so I am not a lawyer and I do not sit on the legal side. I sit on the business side. Went to law school, not a lawyer. That's by design. So the reason we did that is because our organization viewed privacy as a business imperative. So it was not just about tick the box compliance and our own privacy program. It was about this position that we as an agency play in the ecosystem where we're stewards of our clients' brands and we facilitate these relationships with our partners and we work with those partners to find solutions that align to brands' needs, and privacy is no different. So if we look at CCPA as an example, you had brands grappling with how they were going to position themselves. Are they going to sell personal information and put that do not sell link on their sites? Everyone was nervous about what that might mean for their reputation at first. And so you saw a spectrum of approaches emerge. And so on the back of that, those decisions were made somewhere within their org, legal, privacy, likely in consultation with IT, sometimes not flowing down to the marketing teams. So we're here and we proactively took steps to flag things like platform changes, like Facebook's limited data use and Google's restricted data processing, and encourage our clients to connect the dots on their side and make sure that marketing, as well as their privacy and compliance and legal and IT stakeholders, are making joint decisions together and know that we're here to help them navigate what that means from a media standpoint. So I absolutely think that there's a big role to play, not just from an operational standpoint, like what I just outlined, but also from a responsibility standpoint. And I think that, yes, the CPO, the privacy team will play a big role in that. But I also think what's more interesting is how many cross-functional stakeholders it will take to get all of this right. So whenever I talk about privacy, I always underscore the importance of partnership internally and externally. They're actually, putting policy and philosophy into practice are two different things, and you just cannot do them without candid, trusted partnerships. So I think, beyond what the CPO role is, it's also this partnership facilitation role that's trying to bring together business interests, compliance related requirements, and everything in between.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. It is about creating that space and also demystifying some of the terminology as well. I was talking to someone representing a brand, and I was really impressed by he was talking about how he demanded, you mentioned like data clean rooms from all their partners, and how he took a consistent approach to that. And before I knew it, I mean, he was in a marketing function, but we were talking about data privacy impact assessments, and not only had they embraced those, and I'm a big nerdy fan of those, because they're kind of like, as a marketer, they're kind of like a pre-flight check before you do anything that might be really dumb, but also to help engage with different stakeholders, like you say, the business, to get them all on the record, to assess whether this is worth doing and the risks, and then to assign those out, rather than having the privacy function kind of bolted on, because ethics doesn't work unless you're in it. It's people can sniff out ethical greenwashing pretty quickly. And I mean, what impressed me about this conversation was, not only had they embraced the notion of a data protection impact assessment, but they'd rebranded it to make it more accessible in the organization, and called it, it's just slightly cheesy, but a human protection impact assessment, human privacy impact assessment. Because I think the more that we can, keep the dialogue going of this at the center of the business, the more powerful this movement will be, and the more this is a two-way dialogue. And I think a lot of the problems that there have been in the past with adopting more privacy-centric tech have been because of a lack of buy-side understanding, and therefore demand. And I think we're starting to see that change. I mean, particularly, I mentioned we talked about making ethical data pay off. I mean, George, you're BIGtoken, you're working with, as I mentioned, 9 out of 10 top brands now. I've mentioned my one very small sample of one anecdote of the marketing director talking to me about data clean rooms. Can you share some of the insights that you're getting from brands that you're working with this?
Sure. They're good. I mean, it's common sense. It's not total rocket science. If you do things the right way, you'll get good results, right? We talked here a lot about gaining trust from your customers. It's really all about gaining trust from your customers. Most of them at this point know what you're doing when you're extracting data from them. They get it. And so if they trust you through this data extraction practice, and you're providing them transparency and control and giving them some value back, then what you're doing is you're now having a meaningful conversation with your customer. It's that simple. You're having a meaningful conversation with your customer. That is getting you a massive breadth and depth of insight from your customer that you've never had before. I can guarantee you that. Instead of collecting a couple of pieces of PII and then trying to patchwork together some fragmented identity from the universe of horrible data, you're having a meaningful conversation with your customer, getting massive insight on your customer, right? And so now you've built this trust and created this ability to create the best personalization that you've ever been able to do. And it's coming from the right place. You're not personalizing in a creepy way, like we talked about a little while ago, where now all of a sudden you're getting, lingerie ads for the next 12 years and you have no idea why. Although, Gilbert, I think you know why you got those lingerie ads. But anyway,
it wasn't me.
Right?
It was asking for a friend. Yeah.
Sure. So you're getting all this great information. You're creating personalization, but you're creating it from the right place. And so therefore the bottom line is you're creating better data and you're making the cash register ring, because the customer is going to choose between brand X or your brand, and you have better personalization and trust with your consumer. They're going to choose you. Our thesis from the beginning is that this whole thing that we did at BIGtoken was just to create better first-party data. And our thesis was always that if you create better first-party data and you do it in an ethical way and the consumer trusts you as a brand, you're going to create the best data in the world. The best data in the world creates the best advertising results in the world. And I'm talking about against the meaningful metrics like ROI and incremental return on ad spend and, cart value and things like that, not engagement or click rate. And we've proven the thesis. We have, case study after case study that shows how we've created incredible scope and breadth of data on a brand's customer. We use that data to create personalization and incrementality because we were able to look at the insights and find millions of others that look just like them. And it's a win-win-win all around.
That's a good point. I'm mindful that we've got a question which is very to the point, which is, do we, the consumer, get paid for all this? And obviously that is also a key aspect of the BIGtoken offering, that they get a second income essentially from their data. And I think it would be good to, obviously the idea of a universal data income is something that's been getting traction, and it also is starting to get slightly more realistic in terms of micro payments via Web3 and crypto. Having said that, there have been, some people certainly in privacy circles have said, if people are getting paid for providing their data and insights rather than giving it free without even being aware of it, that they'll give the wrong information, or it's been treated with that this kind of dilutes privacy rights. From my experience on the talking to BIGtoken users, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. But it'd be good to know the bigger picture on that, George, in terms of how people are monetizing their data and using it.
Sure. No, that's a great point and a great question. To answer the question very quickly and simply is I think the question was, are we going to get paid for this now? And the answer is sometimes yes now, and maybe more and more going into the future. We're advocating for it. And it's not necessarily just, hey, you're getting paid. It's like, hey, you're getting your share back. You're getting value back now, finally, once and for all. And through platforms like BIGtoken, and there are other ones out there. I'm not sitting here as a shameless plug on BIGtoken the whole time. There are others out there. You are sharing your data. You're not necessarily only answering questions and self-attesting, but you are really locking down your identity, right? And you are creating ways to share data from the identity. So in other words, it's not just attested stuff, it's passively through all the things you do in your digital life already anyway, that's creating data and that companies are making billions of dollars off of regardless. You're locking that down now, and you're creating a way to stream that through a platform like BIGtoken and others so that you are getting value back. You're getting paid for it. You're monetizing your data in passive ways that are impossible to construe or lie about or misrepresent. And just a quick anecdote, not to get all soft and fluffy here, but you mentioned the kind of the creation of universal income. One of my favorite things about being at BIGtoken is once in a while I'll get a message from one of our users saying, hey, thank you for creating this thing. I'm going through something right now, and I just, what you guys did, made it possible for me to, buy groceries this week. And so when you think about it that way, it's important, and it's powerful, and we're happy about it.
I think that's right, and I think you're right as well that this isn't, there needs to be an ecosystem of other players as well as BIGtoken to create these multiple streams of income, because some of the the data dividend solutions have almost replaced getting nothing with getting everything via the state, and that's just replacing a single one monolith with the other. And I think there's been some interesting as I mentioned, in the kind of Web3 space and the decentralized blockchain space, there's been examples, and also the kind of Robin Hood movement of re-emancipation of people in terms of their data, and also sort of collective activism. I mean, to all the panel, do you? I mean, with it used to be the case with privacy, but I think now often with blockchain it goes up and down. And like when I go on a car journey with my children, they're always asking, "Are we there yet?" With a lot of this blockchain technology, it's very exciting, and obviously not. There's opportunities for things like staking crypto. We don't, not a lot of people in the grand scheme of things have crypto, but we all have data. How far are we away from embracing kind of blockchain technology into these ethical pillars and daily business? Who wants to jump in on that?
I can start with that, and I think that the answer is very not far at all. I think we're very close. The technology exists, it's out there. I think a lot of people start sweating when asked their opinion on it because it's over complicated. To me, from BIGtoken's perspective and from a data privacy perspective, I think it's very, very simple. And that's that it's a technology that allows for the utmost transparency and control. There's no hiding on blockchain. And so I think it lends itself very well for the next wave of ad tech, or ad tech 3, as I like to call it. And as it relates to data privacy and where our data should live, exist, and be manipulated. To me, it's really that simple.
Good, exciting stuff. And I see that we've got a raised hand from someone in the audience. We'd love to take a question. While we're waiting on that, I got a question for you, Tiffany. Obviously, we've seen Apple make privacy, a big part of their marketing spiel. What goes on Apple stays on Apple, and we had iOS 14 with their privacy update, and to some extent, Google, Facebook, and Amazon seem to be benefiting short term, at least, from a shift of advertising dollars, away from Apple as they shut out various forms of, third-party advertising. What do you think this is going to continue, and what other changes do you see happening? Everyone's getting out their crystal balls here, but in year 2022.
Very good question, and one that has really actually came up in conversation for me earlier today. So Apple makes their money in many different ways, right? They don't necessarily need our data to make money, right? Because they make money a lot of different ways. So for them, this is, of course, a loss of revenue. However, I think that Apple is also much smarter than that. And so what I think is that it's a temporary loss of revenue, right? Because it's only a matter of time before, especially such a behemoth like Apple, and then also the legislation, I think it's going to go hand in hand. We're going to keep seeing legislation, and we're going to keep seeing business practices change. And people will, as consumers will put pressure on all of these big companies and these big agencies as well to make change. So over time, I think what we'll see that this start to even out a little bit, because I think Amazon, Google, Facebook, they're all going to have to, revise some of their current practices, and maybe they'll be forced to real legislation, or maybe it will be just consumer and marketplace effects that pressure them to make those changes. But as they do that, I also think Apple will start to do what everybody's going to start to do, and it's going to be not about all of the data in the world. It's going to be the depth of data. It's going to be what does Apple have that is unique to them? What do they know about me? What do they know about the individual, and how on all the ways of which we What do we drive? How do we use our phones? Or do we have, the full suite of products of Apple products? Do we just have one or two? But it's also going to be then what are we consuming? Think about Apple News. Think about all of their partnerships and all of the ways in which they can get depth to data instead of just breadth. And I think that it's temporary. I think, yes, right now, they're losing some revenue, but I think that there's going to be some long-term plays in what Apple can offer in a unique way, in a privacy compliant way, that will then benefit them more in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And Apple are putting themselves in a good place as being, a mix, privacy, privacy wrapper and depth of data as a premium product. It's a bit like the Financial Times I was talking about earlier. Is a really nice niche to occupy while the kind of regulatory landscape reorganizes itself. And actually, to that point with crypto, I mean, we're seeing crypto come under a lot of pressure now. And not all of it is going to, I love crypto very much, but not all of it is going to survive in its current form. But what will come out will be that much more applicable and slot-inable. I'm not sure if that's a verb, but to some of the existing structures around data and the changing, social mores, because regulation moves at one speed, but public perception tends to reach a tipping point, and it does feel, that we are in a time of great change. I'm mindful of the time, but I had one more question on the regulatory side of things. It seems that, I mean, this morning I dived into like the UK is separating from the rest, or has separated from the rest of Europe. So I dived into a 147-page document from the UK about how they're going to do things differently with data. Ariel, it'd be great to get your views on what's going to be the big legal changes in the next 1 to 5 years. What do we need to be mindful of based on our pillars?
Sure, and I might actually start with one that kind of is connected to what you all were just talking about with Apple and those changes. So one interesting thing that has emerged and is going to be required both by Colorado's new privacy law as well as by California's amended CCPA, so CPRA, is the honoring of a global privacy control, a universal opt-out, browser level opt-out, what have you. So interestingly, Apple has yet to integrate with global privacy control. There are some browsers that have. Apple's is not one of them. So I think it's just, it nods to a little bit to how one of the effects of the coming 1 to 5 years is really seeing truth, who's prioritizing privacy and respecting people's choices and embracing that as a value versus some of, the more PR-ish, to use your term, Gilbert, privacy-related efforts. So that is one thing that we'll see. We've also seen so I mentioned Colorado, Virginia just passed its own law. That the stateside patchwork is going to be more complex. Maybe as we wait with bated breath, there will be something federal that perhaps happens within 1 to 5 years. I'm not sure anyone's willing to place a bet there yet. So in the meantime, we have this reality of the domestic patchwork of laws, and we have an increasingly complex international patchwork. And what I think matters for companies is having the right infrastructure and data strategy to manage through what is sure to continue to be a dynamic regulatory environment. And I think, one other big trend that we'll start to see more around is ethical artificial intelligence, machine learning, and dark patterns. So the FTC is already leaning in. They had an open forum on dark patterns and manipulative user interfaces. I think that will start out as the focus area because manipulative user design undermines user choice, and then somehow tangentially also will tie into the exploration of ethical AI and ML more broadly. And I think the underpinning all of that is that what we're going to see, at least from a US standpoint, is a lot more focus on the intersection of privacy and consumer protection more broadly, right? So I think a lot of the areas that we'll see lawmakers and regulators focus on are some of these things that are really about consumer fairness, like I just mentioned with dark patterns and ethical AI.
Absolutely great. Well, a lot happening across all fronts. And so, well, I wanted to thank all of you for some great insights. We covered a lot of ground in an hour. So I wanted to thank Ariel Garcia, Tiffany Johnson, and George Stella, and all of you who've dialed in tonight. My name's Gilbert Hill. Thanks a lot for your time, and for BIGtoken for hosting the event.